It's another month, it's another end of month video. So the first thing I watched in the month of July was the sequel of Walter Mitty, another Ben Stiller directed film. I watched Zoolander last month and I watched some of his other films last year as well. Yeah, I was just interested to see this. I just saw it on Disney Plus and I really enjoyed it. It feels very different to the other films that Ben Stiller has directed because it doesn't have like nearly as much humour as his other films. It does have some romance throughout this film as well. It's definitely not a typical romance story. I think the concept is just really great as well. I do think the pacing can be slightly off, especially when Walter is like travelling from like country to country and places to places. It's usually like a montage and I would like to see more of him like travelling. It can work well and it does build emotion sometimes as well. I like how Walter daydreams in this film as well, and sometimes you can't differentiate whether he's actually daydreaming or if it's actually happening. And when Walter achieves something in this film, you really like feel for him and sympathise with him, and it just shows to how great Ben Stiller is as an actor. I'd give it a solid 8. And then I watched The Mask. This is just a childhood favourite of mine. It can get a bit cheesy at points and it doesn't age well in terms of the editing, but I think the CGI holds up like really well for 1994 and it just adds to the wacky and crazy nature of this film. Jim Carrey, obviously one of my favourite actors, he does a great performance at not just The Mask but also Stanley Ipkiss. His like mannerisms and little things he does are just so great. There's so many iconic lines in this film as well, and the soundtrack is like really underrated in my opinion. Like, come on, Cuban Pete, come on now, come on. Absolute banger. The superhero aspect of this film works really well as well against the romantic plots, and everything just has a charm to it, I feel. So it's just really nostalgic for me. I'm glad I gave it a rewatch. I think I'll give it a 9. Just a really solid, fun comedy film. And then I finished watching Stranger Things 1, season 1. I don't know what to call it. Everyone would not shut up about this show. I just had to give in and watch this show. And I really enjoyed this first season. The characters in the show just really well written. And the concept is really great as well. And it's really great like seeing like the characters discover things and realise things about the disappearance of Will. It's just really engaging. I found that I enjoyed the Hopper and Joyce stuff actually more than the kids and 11 stuff. I just found their dynamic much more engaging, but it's just a great and unique concept with a great 80s charm to it, which really makes this show for me. I'd give it a solid 9.5, I think. And then I finished watching The Boys season 3. This season is just as gruesome and bloody as always. I like the introduction of the 24-hour compound V and how that creates conflict between the group, and also like the focus on Homelander's mental struggles in this film, and he doesn't feel as indestructible as he did in the last 2 seasons. The twists and turns this show gives us every episode just so great as well, and the finale was just really satisfying and I'm really excited for the next season. I don't know what else to say. I'd give it a solid 9. And then I watched Thor Love and Thunder. This was a pretty controversial one on Twitter. There was a lot of differing opinions on this film. I saw it in the cinemas like a few days after it came out. My excitement for this film went down quite a bit, but I actually really enjoyed it for the most part. The positives outweigh the negatives for me. It's definitely not as good as Ragnarok, because Ragnarok is just top tier. I think it's one of the best MCU films in my opinion. I do feel like Taika Waititi's style, it was like cranked to like 100, and sometimes it works and like adds some great unique flavour to the MCU, and there's some jokes in this film that I think could go toe to toe with Ragnarok, but like a lot of people have said, the jokes are very overwhelming and overdone a lot of the time, and they really overshadow the more like serious topics of this film. Like every character is cracking jokes and there are some like bad cringe-worthy moments. I do like Thor's character again. His character is just as goofy as his other recent appearances in the MCU, which I really like. I do like the concept of Jane as Thor. I'm pretty sure it's adapted from the comics, but her character just feels really different from the earlier Thor films, and her death at the end of the film wasn't that impactful, mainly because everything before was treated like a joke. There's so many fake out deaths in this film as well. It's just started to annoy me after a while. I do think the highlight of the film though was Gore the Bot. I do think the highlight of the film though was Gore the Bot. I do think the highlight of this film though was Thor the Bod. I do think the highlight of this film though was Thor the God Butcher. No, Thor the... I do think the highlight of this film though was Gore the Thug Butcher. Why can't... I do think the highlight of this film for me though was Gore the Thug...
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man.
do think a really great highlight of this film for me though was Gore the God Butcher. He was just a great addition to the film and just a great villain overall. Played really well by Christian Bale. It just sucks that we don't get to see a lot of him. Overall, it's not as disappointing as I expected it to be, but it would probably be in my lower half of the MCU ranking. I'd give it a 6. And then I finished watching Miss Marvel. I'm sorry to say, but this might be my least favourite MCU thing. I didn't mind the first episodes. I enjoyed the unique style. It looked like it was going in an interesting direction. But as the episodes went on, it just became more and more generic MCU stuff. And yeah, I just didn't like it at all. And that style just got completely lost after the first 2 episodes as well. I think the thing that makes or breaks this show is the character of Kamala. And I didn't like the character of Kamala. I do think there is some decent humour thrown in throughout this show. Some bits did get me smiling, but after like the halfway point of the show, I just became bored of it. I also think there's way too much focus on like the culture aspect of the show, and less on the superhero aspects. The finale was just really underwhelming for me as well. I just didn't care about anything going on in it. There was a mutant reveal, I guess. I'm sorry, but this might be the first ever time on this channel that I've rated something below a 5. At least with films which I've rated like a 5, like Alien Resurrection, I at least had like a fun time with it and I enjoyed what was going on, even if the story being told was absolutely awful. And also with like films which I didn't actually care about, like The Last Samurai, at least I respected like the filmmaking and work that went into it and the performances. This was just generic MCU stuff for me. I am going to rate Miss Marvel a 4 out of 10. And then I watched The Social Network. I actually didn't watch this in the comfort of my bedroom. I watched this at school in my computer science class. I actually really enjoyed it. I think it's a really great biopic on Mark Zuckerberg and the creation of Facebook. I like how it doesn't shy away from showing Mark in a bad light in this film as well. The performances in this film are really great, like Justin Timberlake's in this film, obviously Andrew Garfield, and then you have Jesse Eisenberg. He could act more like a robot because obviously Mark Zuckerberg is a robot. It was a bit too human. Yeah, a really solid film overall. I'd probably give it a 9.5. And then I watched the Monty Python trilogy, starting with Monty Python and the Holy Grail. This has so many iconic jokes and lines in this film. I do like the use of animation in points in this film, which are like really visually interesting and contrast the like live action bits of this film. And it's really what makes this film like so unique. I also like the period setting of this film as well, in medieval times. I'd give it a 9.5. I think it's really near perfect comedy. And then I finished watching Stranger Things 2. I like how it focuses more so on Eleven's character in this film. It gives her time alone, like away from the group, and expands on her character a lot. The concept feels really unique and different from last season as well. And I like Will being actually part of the team now and not being stuck in the Upside Down for a whole season. And I absolutely love Bob in this season as well. Samwise Gamgee himself. And I was absolutely gutted when they killed him off. I do think there can be a little bit of like filler in this season. And I didn't like the episode where Eleven like met the other girl with powers. It just felt like filler. But yeah, overall, another solid addition. Definitely not as good as the first season. I'd probably give it an 8. And then I finished watching season 3 of Solar Opposites. I don't think this is as solid as the last 2 seasons. I do think the jokes can get a bit out of date and cringeworthy at moments, but I still like the opposites as characters, and the hijinks they get into are just really great again. And obviously the wall subplot is just still really great and interesting. I just feel like Justin Roiland is bringing too much of his Rick and Morty style humour into the show. But overall, an enjoyable, fun comedy show. I'd give it a solid 7.5. And then I went to the cinema to watch the greatest film of all time. The second best obviously being Morbius. Minions: The Rise of Gru. This is kind of embarrassing to admit, but now that I've watched this film, I can say that I've watched every single Despicable Me film. I do have a soft spot for the first 2 Despicable Me films, because I used to have them on DVD and used to watch them all the time. I just think they're really great family films, and Steve Carell's Gru, just really great. The humour in the film is just really fun as well. Minions was pretty bad, and Despicable Me 3 was a bit forgettable. I really think this is a return to form. I really enjoyed it, and I really had a good time with it. It was just a fun time. I like the new villains introduced, and I really like the 70s aesthetic, and I really think it works really well. I do notice that there's like little callbacks and references to like the previous films as well, which I really appreciate. There are some really interesting visual choices as well that I haven't seen in an Illumination film before. I really like that they're actually switching up their style for once. It's just a fun time. I'd give it a solid 7. And then I finished watching Stranger Things 3. This has an extremely different tone and writing style than the last 2 seasons, and it took me a while to get used to it, really. I also think there's some characters in this film that act different to how they were in the last 2, especially Joyce and Hopper. I just feel like the relationship is different in the season, and it just feels odd. I wasn't really a big fan of the Russian subplot as well. I just found it to be really boring, but I do like what came out of it with the Dustin and Robin and Steve subplot, and I really like the relationship between those 4 as well. I really like the main storyline as well of the monster that like possesses Billy. It leads to some like disturbing moments and some really tense moments between characters. I just think the pacing of this season was a bit off like the last season. It does have some great moments and character development, but overall it is my least favourite season. I'd give this a 7. And then I finished watching Stranger Things 4. I really think this is a return to form for the show, whilst still having that little bit of season 3 flair that I liked. I think this also has like the most truly disturbing and frightening moments of this show so far, which I really like. All the like interconnected stories of this season are really great as well, and I found all of them engaging. I do think it improves on the Russian subplot as well, and it has some great stuff with Hopper. I like the proper like humanization of Eleven in the season as well. Obviously she loses her powers, and she can actually like speak proper like fluently in this season as well, which I think is really great for a character. Vecna is a really great villain as well. I think he's the best villain in the show so far, and his backstory is just really great. I noticed the editing and pacing of these episodes were really great for me as well, and I was really welcome to the longer episode length. Saying this, I do think there was the overuse of flashbacks in this season, and some of the characters were really dodgy at points. I'd give it a 9. And then I watched Monty Python's Life of Brian. I think it's a great sequel that has some jokes that are just as great as the first. It doesn't feel as absurd and random as the first, and I do think it lacks the animated moments that made the first so unique, but I think it has a much more interesting and engaging plot overall, and I like the Roman setting. Again, a really great comedy film. I'd rate it a 9. And then the final thing that I watched this month was Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. This felt extremely different to the last 2 films in terms of style, and I'm not sure if I like it or not. You can definitely tell it has a higher budget than the last 2, and whilst the last 2 felt like absurd and weird, this just feels straight up mad at points. I don't think the jokes are as frequent as the last 2 as well, and there's a few musical numbers in this film as well, which weren't seen in the last 2. I do find the musical numbers to be memorable as well. The jokes are still really great in this film, and I think the anthology style of this film was a really nice change for the trilogy. I love how it all ties in at the end as well. Overall, I think I give this film an 8. So that's it for all of the films and TV shows that I've watched in the month of July. I'm currently watching season 1 of Jessica Jones. I wanted to watch more Marvel Netflix shows because I've only watched Daredevil, even though I realise now I should have watched The Defenders in between season 2 and season 3. But I'm really enjoying the show so far. I've only watched the first episode, but I'm really invested in it, and I'm interested to see how the show progresses. And I'm also currently watching, obviously, volume 2 of Better Call Saul season 6. It's still absolutely phenomenal. I'm so excited to see how this show concludes. It's definitely in my top 2 favourite TV shows of all time. Number 1 obviously being Breaking Bad. So there you go. If you like this video, please leave a like. If you didn't leave a dislike, and I will see you in the next video.